The Good Luck Doctor and Ra present Good Luck Stories, Episode 1, in 360 Virtual Reality, with John and Connie Mosher.
So, prior to being approved to do research on the supportive nature, I had to prove that it was a viable concept. So I had to do a research review in the literature of Vedic science to say, is there such a thing, and is it documented in the old literature, and did Maharishi talk about it? And then I had to give some, what would you call it, some preliminary examples of events that I would sort of focus on in order to, extrapolate data about that subject. So one of the supportive nature stories that I really enjoy sharing occurred in Fairfield while I was at a barbecue in the backyard of a friend of mine. And a young lady pulled into the yard, and she was driving a bicycle, and she came in rather abruptly and flopped into a chair, threw her bike on the ground, and started sobbing. Well, the person that was there really loved this young person, and it was breaking their heart to see them so distraught, but she was sobbing so hard we couldn't even find out. Nobody could get the information out of her what had gone wrong. Come to find out, when she calmed herself down, that she had lived on the West Coast. She graduated from college, had established herself in a job, and when the housing crisis crashed, the economies of the cities got tighter, and she lost a couple of jobs, one after another. Eventually she lost her home, and she had to move back into Fairfield to be with a parent. So in her world, that was like the end of being independent and an adult and so forth, and she was upset by it. But that particular day, she had enrolled to go and continue her education at MUM and had enrolled in a master's program. And in the afternoon, she'd received a phone call that they were coming to repossess her car. So she was distraught. It was like the straw that broke the camel's back. She didn't know how she was going to drive to school in the winter, and she was overwhelmed. So the person that was listening, that she'd come to tell, got up to give her a hug. And he stood up like this, and as he approached her, just a few feet in front of him, to give her a hug, to console her, a car pulled into the driveway of the house. And a young woman got out of the car, the driver, and she ran around the front of the car, and another car pulled behind it, and as she got into the passenger seat of the second car, she said, "I know you people are very trustworthy." She said, "I have just received news that my parents are in very severe health problems in Taiwan. I have to leave the country for 2 years." And as she said that, she threw something. She said, "These are my car keys. Can you please give my car to somebody who will take care of it while I'm gone?" And that person caught the keys and handed them to the lap of the young girl. Okay. So in the matter of a few moments, the desire to give created a situation. Now, a lot of people say those things are just coincidence or accident, but it happened with such timeliness that it spurred me on to want to do research, to academically validate and to bring science behind the mechanism that supports that kind of relationship between the human mind and the environment.
Wow.
Yeah. So that was one of the great gifts, of me being able to see that in action, and then being able to be motivated by that in order to do the research.
Well, that's one of my absolute favorite stories from the beginning research. Yeah. And I was hoping that you might be able to share with John and Connie, who perhaps haven't heard this story, of one of your early synchronistic events for...
They may never have heard it. Back in 1974, I had just become married and I moved to Brockport. And I was reading Carlos Castaneda's books at the time. And he was motivating me to examine the nature of reality and what was really going on. And so I started to use intent in a purposeful way. I started to, based on the knowledge that was in his earlier books, started to say I could intend a reality. And if I had, the right energy behind that intent, then things would transpire to fulfill my desire. So one day, I was trying to share this concept with another colleague, and they were very doubtful. They said, that doesn't really work. Life just deals you all kinds of problems and it's nothing. I said, well, I'll give you a challenge. I said, you point out anybody that's in this big plaza and ask me to have dinner at their house, but they have to invite me without me ever doing anything intentionally to do that except hold my intent. And you were walking right by in front of us at that moment, John. And the man pointed out, he said, go to dinner at that professor's house. Well, I didn't even know who John was at the time, and I did learn that you taught ethology, so the action that I took was that I joined one of his classes, but I couldn't really overtly go up and say, could you please have me to dinner? A short time after that, you invited a group to Morrissey Woods. We spent the whole day together, and I think within a week you had invited some students over for a hot soup and stuff like that. And that's how we originally met, is because of the intention to help somebody else see that the universe was connected.
Did you know that?
No.
I'm surprised we never knew
No,
that, because
no.
I knew you took lifestyle, ecological lifestyles.
Yes, I did,
You and
yeah.
Marion. And
Not
the-
consciously.
Yeah, right.
But,
So-
but what
It
I
was a
love
put-up
about
job,
that
though,
is
by
that
the
it was
universe.
your friend
Yes.
that set the
Yeah,
challenge.
yeah.
Is that John
That was
Pilpack?
important to me, that other people were engaged, and it wasn't just my delusion that
Yeah.
it was happening. You know, that was always very important.
I remember a group of students being here, and Jenny was
Yeah.
a little,
Yeah.
she was in a high chair.
I
I
know.
don't know if that was,
Yeah. I may have been amongst that. John was only about this big, I think.
okay,
Yeah.
so,
I've
yeah.
grown a lot since then.
That's true. So,
Was that John Pilpack by any chance?
well, Pillipick was here too.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
But he
Little
wasn't the
Johnny.
one who
No.
challenged you.
No, it wasn't John. No, it was a friend from Long Island who, since his name was Porco, we didn't know his last name was Porco. Yeah.
Oh.
But it was such an amazing, and then from that journey, but what I didn't understand that I know now is that I would go into an awareness that I imagined I was connected to nature, but then when times got tough, I became object referral again. So I would cycle in and out of these states of consciousness because they change at a blink of an eye.
Yep.
And so I would struggle at times and then have it effortlessly organized at times, and I couldn't put my hand on what the trigger mechanisms
Had
were.
the same kind of experience. I know just what you're saying.
Yeah.
So have you since found out?
I have, Connie. I talked to John. You know when you fall in love with somebody, Connie? You
I
know,
do.
Yeah. And when you look into their eyes and you feel that love resonate and there's a bliss that rises in both of you, well, as you put your awareness through a type of meditation or a sweat lodge or something, as you let your consciousness dwell in the transcendent, it continues to mature after your birth. And it matures, and as it matures, it integrates further and further out until it becomes the universe. So even if you look at this grape, you see that that grape is yourself and you're in love with it. And it's the resonance of that love that's the magic in the whole universe.
That's the magic
Yeah.
that brings it all.
That makes it all possible.
All that's
It's
included.
knowing this is the self and having that lively self-referral awareness. And you can't create it through the intellect. It has to be cultured, just like an infant is cultured in the womb. The awareness has to be cultured after birth by allowing it to dwell in the transcendent. And it continues to gestate until it reaches unity.
You have to do it. You can't
Yes,
just read
right.
about
It's
it.
an intentional thing.
And that's the whole difference.
Yes,
And
yeah.
so meditation is
It's one of the vehicles.
one of the vehicles,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah, it's so beautiful, you know. And just like you can't grow your hair a different color, you can't force it. It has to naturally take place. So they call that, the term for that is self-effulgent. It gives light to it and grows itself into pure awareness.
Well, this
That's
is how the
a
whole thing
new
works.
term. I love it.
Isn't that beautiful?
Because I always loved the word effulgent.
Yes.
But self-effulgent,
Yeah,
that's even
yeah.
better.
And what I love about it, it incorporates every religion and belief system and allows it to become not somebody else that's doing it for you. It's your own self that, like God's hand, is nurturing you back to your home in your greater being. It's
It's
so beautiful.
All about the light.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really beautiful. So thank you so much for letting us do this.
All of these stories are just wonderful.
One little thing that ties into the story about having the desire to show it to show synchronicity to your friend, and you talked about Castaneda, and Don Juan in the series points out to Carlos that there's a mechanics of it often only working when there is a desire for someone else's growth.
Yes, he said you can accumulate power, but the power can only be used not for your own grandiosement, but to actually help another person step into their own evolutionary track.
Wow.
So one of the things that happened when I met Ryan, do you have a minute to share that with us, Ryan?
Sure.
So we met. I told you about living in a miraculous heaven on earth life, but Ryan hadn't had many direct experiences. Mm-hmm. So like the person that directed me to you, I said to Ryan, ask for anything you want, Ryan, and we'll see how fast nature delivers it. Just for your own, for his own, interest. So tell him what you asked for and how it happened.
Yes, so it sounds a little abstract. Stan did put a little caveat on it. He said it needs to be something that you believe could be possible to be fulfilled. So, if you start off with a request for $1 million or something like that, a lot of time the intellect in the belief system is that's really not possible. Yeah. So I said, okay, well, I'll just kind of go to that edge and tone it down a little. And spontaneously it came to me, how about if I've always had a desire, I love nature, to see a possum up close, but I've never seen one. And they seem...
He didn't know the possum was my power animal.
Oh.
No. The possum?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Which may be a story in another video, perhaps.
It probably is.
So that's what popped into my head, and I said that would be something that I would find, since I've lived my whole life and never seen one. That would be pretty unique if it somehow showed up. And he said, okay, well, let's just be relaxed about it and see if a possum does show up for us. So the very first thing that happened was that only in the next 2 or 3 days, people started seemingly randomly telling me possum stories. And I was at lunch, and this guy was explaining how he worked on a farm, and started telling this story about a possum that was inside the tractor they were driving, and everybody was bailing out of the tractor, and then he jumped out, and then the crazy possum finally jumped out, and he had to go run the tractor before it ran off the gorge or something.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, this is a little unusual. Well, then the next day, we decided that we would just go out into nature and tell some stories and have an evening under the stars or whatnot.
Yeah.
And so I said, Stan, well, do you know where we're headed? He said, no, I'm just driving through the countryside. We'll just head north and see where we end up. Well, it starts to get dusk and the sun goes down, and we're driving through some backcountry roads, and we turn around this bend, and there's a possum like slowly crossing the road.
They're very slow.
Yeah. So we gave him a lot of space, and Stan stopped quickly, and so we sat there, the headlights were on, and we're watching this possum. Well, he stops right in the middle of the road, and then turns himself and looks right into the car at us, and just kind of like, oh, hey guys, how you doing? And I said, wow, this is pretty amazing. Well, if that wasn't all of it already, then he saunters up to my side of the car, and then just sits on its haunches and looks me in the eyes through the car window, and then just kind of, I get the feeling like, okay, has this been meaningful to you? Have you had enough? And I kind of nodded my head at him and joyfully laughing on the inside. And then he just turned and slowly sauntered off into the bushes.
Yeah. Boy, now talk about a deja vu.
Yeah.
I know this. You've never told the story before, but all of a sudden It was familiar to me.
Wow.
Oh,
That's so
really?
great.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
I have no idea what that's all about.
Wow, that's
Wow.
It was
incredible.
just like I was with you or something.
Yeah.
Like-
But we all know that possums don't do that.
Right.
No.
Well, that's
certainly
the other
don't.
thing.
They
Yeah, we
just,
don't.
they go so slow and somebody hits them and that's the end.
Yeah, or
You know,
they, saunter off into the bushes
Yeah,
immediately.
they
Yeah,
don't
right,
stop and
exactly.
come up
They
to
don't
a
stop
light
and
and
look in the
car.
eye.
Oh my
So then you
God.
kind of said, wow, maybe there's something to
So
this.
I said, okay, all right, this definitely needs a lot more research, and that was one of the motivating factors for me to
Yeah.
switch my major into Vedic science at the Moshers University of Management.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you, Ryan.
Well, that's a beautiful story.
They're all beautiful. And we have had so many synchronicities, but I can't think
No,
of them right
that's
this
fine.
Well,
moment.
one that's just popped in my mind almost along with this. We were visiting our son John and his family in Massachusetts, and Emily was there as well as her husband. So we all went into Boston, and a couple of Johnny's kids and her friend, and Andy, that's Emily's husband's name, and myself, ended up at the aquarium,
Oh,
Boston
okay.
Aquarium.
Oh, that's so beautiful.
Really
Yeah.
huge.
Mm-hmm.
They wrote that book on the octopus, you know,
Yes.
the woman there. So we're there, and they have the big things you can look right in, just like you were scuba diving in the Caribbean or something.
Yeah.
And I'm there, and I get thinking the animal mantra, Om Prajapatinath Swaha, Om Prajapatinath. I'm just thinking.
Yeah.
And I'd been watching a while before I started thinking this, and the various fish and sharks and turtles and all, they go around, and it's quite a big space, but they don't go around real quickly.
Yes.
So I'm there, and then I start thinking that mantra, and we're by this big plate glass window. Well, one of the big green turtles comes up and puts his nose on the window.
Wow. Wow.
Well, I thought, that's kind of amazing. Another turtle comes around. He's trying to crawl over the back of the other turtle
Oh my
to get to the
gosh.
window.
Wow.
And we just stand there, Andy and I just stand there and hear these turtles trying to get to us.
Yeah. Amazing, huh? These ancient beings.
So I shut the mantra off and they backed off.
Wow.
But that was, I'd forgotten all about
That's
it, so you
beautiful.
told the possum story.
Yeah.
And so
Very
things
beautiful.
happen, there's vibrations.
Absolutely.
And with that one, you didn't even have any intent. You were
No.
just doing the mantra.
Yeah, no intent, just all these animals, and
Yeah.
And
Beautiful.
those two big green sea turtles, I mean, they're big as this table or so. That was kind of interesting.
I'd like to
think
get
it-
that from you before we leave to write so that I'll have that mantra. Yeah, that's beautiful.
Oh,
Maharishi said there were 3 things worth collecting: mantras, gems, and something else. I don't remember.
What?
States of
What? We
consciousness.
wanna
States
know.
of consciousness or something. We can
Well, I
cut
just
it.
wanted to ask you, from all your research with Maharishi and so on, do you really feel once you've become kind of an experienced meditator, do you still feel that it's necessary to do a mantra, or can you just go within?
Sure. Well, a couple of things. First of all, right now in our practice, we use the mantra meditation just to settle down from the waking and object referral world. Once we're in that settled state, just like with the TM Cities program, we do lots of other things, but once the state is settled. So the mantra is still a very fast vehicle for
To
settling.
get
But after you become an experienced, settled person, then there's lots of other ways that you can use your consciousness at a settled state. But what I have found out, as I've settled, and even in TM Cities program practice, when it comes to making another phase transition to a deeper state of expandedness, that the mantra is very instrumental in making that transition. So what we've been practicing the last year is about 7 hours of meditation every day for 360 days. And Maharishi wants us to become aware of the 8 different transitions that happen from the unified field all the way up to relativity. So there are 8 flips that awareness goes through, and the mantra helps me get through one of them to the other. So there's still a use for it for me, even at that most subtle state. And so the 8 prakritis or values are the 5 elements, And then there is the absolute silence, becoming aware of itself. So that one unified silence knows itself to be entirety, and that's two, because now it's self-aware. And that self-awareness, being aware that it's aware of itself, is really three, because now you have the silence and the awareness and the awareness of the awareness. Okay?
Yeah.
And then you go through the 5 elements of akasha, space, and so forth. And so at each transition, every thought and every experience goes through 8 transitions to come to the conscious mind. And he wants us awake at every single one of those gaps. So it's really quite impressive, and it continues to keep expanding. It's only the
7
beginning. It's
hours.
always at the beginning, So is it worth it? Well, after a year of doing that, we come into the relative world, and it's just like, continuous heaven on earth and miracles, like the pretzel story, like whatever. It's just never ending.
Yeah.
So you can't say it's worth it when you're in there transcending, because nothing's happening except beautiful bliss. But when you're actively involved, and that's what he always wanted, was integration. It's just heaven.
Yeah, to use it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the answer is yes, I guess, with a qualification.
Yeah, very
Yeah,
good. Yeah,
thank
that's
you.
an interesting answer.
Oh, one little thing that I'd like to add for any future audience that may find this and enjoy it, and enjoy our time with John and Connie.
Oh, it's such a joy, isn't it?
Yes, and just to mention the joy that we had reading John's little book of stories
Yes.
from growing up in the
Wonderful.
1930s.
Yes.
And farm life and stories all the way back about his grandfather.
Yeah.
And I can hopefully have a link below to his book,
Yeah.
because it triggered such fond memories and talking points of our own childhoods and stories from our parents and grandparents.
Yeah.
And life more connected with nature and living with the cycles of the sun,
Yeah.
and just so much
And then-
some fascinating little tidbits. Swimming in the creeks
Yeah.
with the boys, just
Yeah.
wonderful stories.
And then having met you, John, and you suggesting that your integration with nature was enhanced through meditation, and then opening that door for us to investigate, and then bringing us into your family and sharing about motherhood, which encouraged us to have children, because I was of the mindset the world was going to go into struggle, and I didn't want to bring people in. And how beautiful, Connie, you showed us that if you bring people in and culture them, they enhance the good side of life. And it's important to do that for people. So you two have been such a blessing for my family and everybody that I've known. And I can't wait to hear the sequel that does some spiritual side of your journey, John.
And,
Yeah.
and we
Me too.
are pretty unaware of all this, Stan.
Yeah.
It's very interesting to hear this feedback from you.
Yeah, well, I'm decided you better know about it. and how
and
important you
we've
are.
always felt the connection with you,
Yeah,
too. you
yeah.
know.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, I know I've always, had something going on of some kind of a nature that I couldn't quite understand, but my quest has always been to know the deepest interrelationship between how a person can be human and divine at the same time. And I can't say I've achieved it, but I think my intellect has a little bit of an understanding about it.
A clue.
Well, that's the
Clue.
whole thing. You've
Yeah.
achieved it. It's just your intellect hasn't caught up with it.
Well, thanks,
Or that.
John.
Yeah, I get frustrated for the
Oh.
same thing.
So, Connie, if you wouldn't mind, just share. Connie's quite an accomplished artist
Yes.
in various forms of art, and we fell in love with this painting and insisted that it had to come home with us. And if you could share a little bit of the process that inspired you behind this.
Well, I was walking on a garden path made of flagstones in West Virginia, and they were wet from the rain, and the colors were amazing, and the flagstones looked like paintings just themselves, abstract paintings. So I took lots and lots of photographs of them, not having any idea what I would do with the photographs, but I ended up enlarging them on paper, and then I thought, oh, I could make cave art. So I studied a little bit about the caves that were, the drawings that were done in the caves so many thousands of years ago, and began drawing animals in what I hoped was somewhat the style of what, a Paleolithic,
Early cave
an
dwelling.
early cave dweller.
Wow.
And so it was just something that came to me to try.
Well, we just thoroughly enjoy it, and we're fascinated to learn. Almost, didn't believe that all of these colors were natural in that stone. I was sure that that was some sort of a vibrant painting technique as opposed to the natural color in the stone.
I wish I could paint like that. And I don't know how to Photoshop either, so those are the true colors of the stones.
Wow.
When it's wet.
And they just had to be captured.
Almost have to see that, it's so
Yeah.
beautiful.
And when it's not wet, they look kind of like ordinary stones.
Yeah, kind of dull.
Amazing.
So incredible. Well, thank you for
We
sharing.
were in a cave in Disney World. This is the head of a pterodactyl with its wings out like that. And it reminds me an awful lot of your work, right? How beautiful they did it.
Those
Oh,
colors.
yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's really amazing.
Wow.
I was going to tell you something more about John's book.
Yes.
This isn't particularly spiritual, but I proofread it. So I went through line by line.
Yes.
And the more I read, and I've heard some of these stories before. I've
Yeah.
known John for,
60 years.
65
Wow.
years. But reading those stories gave me such a deeper understanding of who he is and why he is who he is.
Is that right? Yeah.
It did.
Isn't that amazing?
I mean, I thought I knew and understood, but there was so much more from,
Wow.
because I'm sure you gained this from the book, that he was so curious and he was so driven
Yes.
to do
Of course.
things that he wanted to do.
Yes.
And there were just so many aspects
Yeah.
that made me have a better
Isn't that
understanding
wonderful?
of
Is-
why he's the
Is there a
person he
copy
is.
of it laying around the room anyplace?
Yeah.
Do you know?
There-
There's one on the couch.
There,
You
I
put
put
it
them
away.
in there, John.
Just run and get them. Wow, that was so wonderful, Connie. Yeah, and I don't know if you were in the yard when I told John that I had worked on farms for 4 years in high school. I was born in Manhattan, but I love nature. So when I got to high school, they had a program in New York City where you could take an agricultural high school degree with your academic high school degree.
In the city, they had.
So every day throughout high school, I went and worked for 3 hours on an annexed farm after my academic classes were finished. And then every summer of that, actually it was 4.5 years almost, I worked on farms in upstate New York to make up the credits that I needed for that other complete degree. So I could relate to almost every story he shared in
That's
here
amazing,
from
Stan,
direct
because
personal
we
experience.
think of you as
I
kind of
know.
a city boy.
Yeah. No, the baling of the hay and the milking of the cows and all of that business was right for me.
And reading it together with Stan was so enjoyable because he could add little bits of knowledge
Yeah.
and memories from
Yeah.
those early farm machinery days.
See, it brings it
I have
out.
a picture of myself on a horse almost exactly. My horse was named Bucky, and it was almost exactly like that.
And
Yeah.
I had to read the couple of chapters about your interactions and getting your horse and him arriving on the train. I read that to my mother, who's been a horse lover since she was a teenager, and she was in a little town in Wisconsin, but was the only child in town who got a horse and rode it around town in her teens.
Yeah.
And
Oh, wow.
so she really related to that pining and having an early relationship with
Yeah,
with a
yeah.
with a friend in the horse world.
Wonderful.
I pointed out that that's the biggest story in the book. I think.
Yeah,
how
when I
many
was
pages
doing it, I
Oh, yeah.
realized that the chapter on horses was like 3 times longer than any of the other chapters.
That's because what he loves is very important to
Yeah,
him.
and it took a long time to manifest that one.
Yeah, wow.
It was also such an encouragement to just sit down and write your stories,
Yeah.
and how personal and interesting they are to so many people, even if they don't always seem like a lot
Yeah.
to you.
Well, that's what we got from it, John. I think in your introduction you said you started to write them and you didn't even know if anybody would value, the writing, but
Well,
you
just
thought
writing
maybe...
it for the kids.
Yeah, and yet
grandkids.
it's so meaningful that, it's very important.
I was just going to give them notebooks,
Oh, yeah.
3-ring notebooks with copies of the stories. Each one would have a
Because
notebook.
he'd write them when he thought of them. So
Yeah.
he had notebooks scattered
Oh,
around,
okay.
and he'd occasionally write a
Yeah,
story.
yeah.
But over time, they accumulated.
Accumulated. Wonderful.
And then I read an article in a Rochester magazine about a person in Rochester who helped people get their books published.
Okay.
Schedule your coaching session, workshop, and more with the Good Luck Doctor at thegoodluckdoctor.com.